Welcome to Auntie Lou's Hour. If you like this podcast, please like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Right, I am beyond excitement because I finally have the fabulous Jide Macaulay on Auntie Lou's Hour. Hello, Jide.
Thank you so much, honestly, for having me, Lou. And I think that one of the great things is that we met in Munich, and a few months ago, obviously at the AIDS conference.
That's
And I
right.
think for me, it's an important space where conversations take place, where advocates in those spaces, literally coming together to talk about the future of sexual health and well-being for many communities, including marginalized communities. So I am so glad, to be on
Yeah.
the podcast today.
I can't wait to get going with you because, the word fabulous, that's the only word that I can think of, like to describe you, But I'm so curious about you. I've seen you on social media. You are everything that I wished I saw when I was growing up. Black leader of faith who is inclusive. Does it make me feel guilty? Does it make me feel ashamed? Does it make me feel like I'm not enough? So when I see you on the socials, I'm like, oh wow, this is really kind of refreshing. It's new for me. Um, so with that said, I'm so curious about what got you to where you are. And I'm interested, what was it like growing up for you? Like, what's life like growing up for you, DJ?
For many people, our journey always starts somewhere. And I think for me, I would like to say that my journey probably started from conception in my mother's womb, because some of the things I've come to understand and believe today is that, God knew us before we were formed in our mother's womb, and God consecrated us and appointed us prophets over nations. So I do believe that. I was born into a Nigerian family. Both my parents are Nigerians. I was born in London, two Nigerian parents, and but I grew up in Nigeria. So my early years, my formative years were in Nigeria. And my family is also a very conservative Christian family. My dad is a religious leader. And, my late mom was also very religious as well. So that's the environment in which I grew up. I went to school in Nigeria, and I returned to the UK in my late teens, early 20s, where I continued my education. I went to university in the UK where I studied law. And then, of course, after my education in law, after working for a number of years within the legal practices as well, I then, went to study theology. But I studied theology at three different institutions and denominations because I was questioning so many things around my faith and my sexuality. And of course, when I concluded my second theological studies, I returned to Nigeria in 2006 to start the community of House of Rainbow. So when you talk about the intersection earlier on, that's where it came from, being a Black African Nigerian, being a theologian. In fact, I describe myself as a queer theologian, someone who's openly gay. And of course, the addition for me is also the fact that I'm also a person living with HIV for the past 21 years. So those intersections of my life also carries me forward in my career, because I'm able to provide, pastoral care and safe spaces, for people like myself and beyond. So if you look at the work that I do, is supporting Black African, Caribbean, LGBT persons of faith, primarily Christians, in reconciling faith and sexuality. That is the work of my organization, House of Rainbow.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say what just jumped into my head is, it's so needed, faith leaders that are there for the Black community, because if not, you've got the likes of, dare I say it, Andrew Tate and others, other leaders that will quite happily lead people. Anyway, I didn't want to go down that road. So UK,
I know you don't want to go down that road, Andrew, but
yeah.
I think that it's very important that people understand theology, and theology can
What
take.
is theology? Talk about theology.
Well, I mean, you want to change the subject. I mean, theology is the study of God, and I think that out of that study of God, we come to know about who we are as well as a people. Just me, we need to come to understand our own pathway as well. Whether our pathway is to Christianity or to Islam or to any other religious beliefs. But I think that the key thing is to know God. For me, I know God who knows me. You understand me? So I think that's very important. And of course, theology is also extended in the understanding of different communities, including marginalized communities. So we know that theology can be broadened by understanding Black theology, woman theology or feminist theology, the theology of people with disability, the theology of people living with HIV, queer theology, and so on and so forth. So those are very important ways of understanding theology. Where is God in all of these situations?
100%, 100%. So when you were talking earlier, what was going through my mind was, law, Nigerian family, education. But at what point did you realize you were different? You wasn't
Well, I mean, to be
straight.
quite honest, I mean, in understanding laws and differences and things like that, comes with time. When did I realize I was different? To be quite honest, I can say maybe around about age 5 or 6, I was
Mhm.
having an understanding of my differences. And just be mindful, especially for anyone listening. I grew up in
Yeah,
Nigeria. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. So there are no vocabularies such as homosexuality or gay or lesbian. We didn't know that. We just knew that I was different. I grew up, as a very soft and effeminate boy. Do you understand me? And
yeah,
of course, when
yeah,
you live under the rubrics of patriarchy and toxic masculinity, there is
mm,
people around you that will want to correct something because they don't like
yeah,
it. And that the fact they don't like it is because they don't understand it. You understand me? An effeminate man or an effeminate boy, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's the same as well with people that are left-handed in many cultures, African cultures, people that were left-handed were forced to use their right hand. That's
yeah,
called conversion therapy. You force a left-handed person to use
yeah.
their right hand, and because we have a cultural belief on how we use the right hand and the left hand, but we forget that science also dictates so many things in the human understanding, human biology. Just I mean, so if someone is left-handed, it means that they're wired that way. If someone is
So,
same gender
yeah,
love attracted, they are also, built that way.
I'm picturing this. Thank you, Jide.
You're
I'm
welcome.
picturing this. I'm picturing somebody watching this video or listening to this podcast, and they're a young Nigerian person, and they are, they're religious. They believe in God, and they feel, but they feel different, and they've got the community around them
Mhm.
supporting that difference. What was it like for you
I,
as a Christian?
yeah, I think I'm glad that you're doing this podcast, and I'm hopeful that a lot more young people, anywhere in the world, and especially in Africa, will come across this. Simply because,
Mm,
the truth is often hidden, from queer people.
yeah,
Nobody wants to, do a theology or an explanation that, David and Jonathan in the Bible were lovers, or Ruth and Naomi in the Bible were same-sex lovers. We don't want to talk about that. We just want to believe on a narrow interpretation that they were platonic friends. But let me say this to you, because the more that we have, people like myself who are openly gay and affirming, and it didn't happen overnight, because there was no
yeah,
for me when I was growing up. I did not see
yeah.
an example of an openly queer religious leaders, from Nigeria, even up to today that we're speaking. Let's make a note of it,
I know, I
and,
know.
and I think that the reality is that the absence of our reality means that we will still continue to live in doubt about the authenticity of same-sex relationship.
So, Okay, so the story goes on. It wasn't straightforward for you. I think the point I'm making is that, you know, you have a wealth of experience and knowledge, lived experience about being queer in Nigeria, growing up in a religious family, and then finding the the strength within yourself to kind of come out and live authentically. So what was life like before you found out you had HIV?
Well, I mean, I think you're going too fast, to be quite honest. I mean,
Go on
I
then.
cut to the chase, but before we come to HIV happened to me much later in life. So let me just unpack the issues around
Yeah.
sexuality. Because
Yes,
obviously
yes.
growing up in Nigeria, there are obviously mixed messaging around, you know, same-sex relationship or homosexuality as it is. You know, I am going to be, I'm nearly 60 years old. So, and I think that reality is that in my generation, we didn't have access to information, the internet or Google search like we do today. We have to travel miles across town to find a library and then look at the back of books to see if we can find anything listed about homosexuality in books. So it was difficult. You couldn't even ask a librarian, you know, whether or not there are, you know, a section in the library that talks about or addresses same-sex relationship. We have Nigeria as a country, you know, that gained independence from the British colony and held on to colonial laws that continue to punish the LGBT community. We have religious communities, you know, that says that homosexuality is an abomination. These are these are the environments that I grew up in, and me having to have a little understanding about myself means that I feel trapped. But I think
Yeah.
that other thing I also want to say is that, you know, living in Africa or living in any African household in my generation, and more so now, you know, there are still families that, you know, already have planned out, you know, what their children would be. You know, they go to school,
Yeah.
they get married, they get older, have a qualification, they get married to the opposite sex and they have children, as if it is really that straightforward, you know. Of course, in my late teens, I struggled with my sexuality because I fully knew that I was different. But
Yeah.
having been raised in Nigeria in an African culture, I understand the values. Having been raised in church, you know, I was conflicted about what the Bible says about same-sex relationship at that age. So I end up marrying a woman. You understand me? I didn't do so to conceal my
Yeah.
sexuality. I do so because I believe, you know, these are the requirements of me as an African child, you know, as what I understood about the Christian text at the time. You understand me? Of course, my struggle with my sexuality still remained, you know. And, you know, I mean, I call it struggle because at that time it was a struggle. I no longer struggle with me loving the same gender. There's no struggle in that right now. I am what I describe myself as a happy, holy homosexual. So,
Yes.
and I think that it takes time to get to that point. It takes time to get to that point. And I think that, you know, the point where I'm at the moment is that I am fully reconciled with my sexuality and my belief in God and my love for God and my love for Jesus. So there is no conflict in that area as we speak. Having said
So
that, yeah,
yeah. Yeah. So
let me
carry on.
yeah,
Carry on.
let me come to the point about HIV. You
Yeah.
know, let's be clear. You know, HIV is a virus. You understand me? And people that are infected with HIV do not know, you know, how the infection takes place because, you know, and the science we understand is that you know, we're probably in contact either sexually or share, you know, and needles with drugs or even mother to baby, you know, transmission can take place. So I think the reality is that until we understand and do effective work to minimize or eradicate the stigma, the shame and denial and discrimination around HIV, we will still be asking the questions about how did people get HIV? And I think, to be quite honest, it's wrong. You understand me? I think that the question is, you know, how are you living well with HIV? You know,
Mm,
no
mm,
one will
mm.
ask you, how did you get cancer? You know, no one will ask you, how do you become diabetic? But
Yes.
I think,
Yes.
how
Yes.
are you living well with HIV should be the question. You understand me?
Mm.
So, and I hope that, you know, people get to hear that.
No, I hope they do. So the road that I want to take you down for people listening are those people, particularly young people in the Black community who are queer or who are different in some way. And when they hear about your journey, it gives them hope.
Mm-hmm.
So when I ask you what was life like before you had HIV, and then what was life like after, it will give people hope that there is a journey. You know, anyone listening out there now who are having a really tough, horrible time, and you feel alone and you can see no light and you feel just like you're drowning, hear these words. It's not always going to be like that.
What I'm trying to understand your question and your point, I think that, you know, life before HIV and after HIV is no different for me. And I think I say that, you know, with a
Okay.
courage, simply because, you know, you have to put things into perspective. You know, in the 1980s, HIV was terribly demonized around the world.
Yeah.
And you see communities distance themselves, you know, from the communities of people infected or affected by HIV. Okay. Government, you know, did not make quick decisions to address the issues. And of course, when you look at it decade by decade, in the 1990s, you know, there were some medication that has been introduced or were becoming more effective. You understand me? Of course, in the early 2000s, there were much more effective medication. So, I mean, I was infected in 2003. Of course, you know, there is still a lot of gap, you know, in the knowledge and information sharing around, you know, HIV infection and HIV transmission and HIV treatment, because people are clearly unaware, you know, of those things. But what I would say for myself is that, you know, when I got the information that I've been infected with HIV, you understand me, I responded to treatment, and I'm still responding to treatment today. And you know, the fact is that it did not change the course of my life and my journey. I got up and clearly determined that I will carry on with my career. I will carry on with my life. So anyone infected with HIV should not change things. So I don't want to leave the narrative that HIV, because people have left narrative that HIV is doom and gloom situation. It's not. HIV is a virus. Anyone that's infected by HIV can live a normal life, and if they pay attention to medication and effective medication, and they can have sexual relationship, they can even have their own family, they can have children, you know, they can, you know, if you're heterosexual, you can marry the opposite sex, and you will not pass on the virus with your partners. And I think this is a message that we need to be very clear to share with people. You know, we've lived for decades where HIV is stigmatized, you know, including stigmatized by healthcare professionals, the very place where you least expect stigmatization of HIV is happening. So we need to break that cycle of stigma, shame, denial, and discrimination. The other place as well is also the church or religious communities where we've seen the increase in HIV stigmatization. It happened to me. It can happen to anybody. But we need to break that cycle. As a priest myself, my messages is often about inclusion and love and care and well-being for everybody. There is no church community that I'm a part of today that does not know that I am living well with HIV. We need to break the cycle of stigma. We need to break the cycle of ignorance that we see in those spaces.
So, did you experience stigma?
You know what? Even that question in itself is stigma. You understand me? And I know that, you know, we're having a conversation, but I think that, you know, people living with HIV are prone to experiencing stigma, even if that stigma is internalized, you know, by the individual themselves. Because again, you know, a lot of people, they will tell you when they're newly diagnosed that after they left the clinic, you know, if anyone look at them or stare at them, they think that maybe they saw that they were HIV positive. We don't see that in the case of people living with other long-term illnesses. No one stare at people and say, oh, you got sickle cell or you got lupus or something like that. So I think that the question around stigma should be, how do we eliminate stigma? How do we break the stigma around HIV?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm curious that I know how I felt when I found out I had HIV, and my stigma was predominantly self-stigma. I didn't actually experience external stigma from my family and friends overtly. So I'm curious to find out if you experience internal or external stigma. Were you like in a place where it didn't affect you in that way?
I think the reality is that, with HIV diagnosis also comes the stigma. And again, it also depends on your environment. You understand me? And I think that, I live in the UK at the moment, so I think people might need to know that, especially those who do not live in the UK. In the UK, there are protective laws right down to your employers must abide by those laws. You understand me? To ensure that, your information is safeguarded. Even if you decide to share your HIV status publicly with in your workplace, it should not affect the quality of your life or the quality of the work that you do. Of course, HIV stigma happens to everyone that is HIV positive. Let's be clear about that. But we need to be able to work towards the eradication of those stigma. I work in a religious environment, and I have faced HIV stigmatization, when another priest, had said to people in the congregation that I'm HIV positive, and people will not come to me for prayers nor or take the chalice from me. And these are the levels of stigma that I've said. But we need to be able to use our lived experiences to educate others that, hold on, if I touch you, you cannot get HIV. If you sit on a seat where I got up from, you cannot get HIV. If I sat next to you on a public bus, you cannot get HIV. If I'm on effective medication, I'm in a relationship, a sexual relationship with somebody, they cannot get HIV. We need to move the stigma, to a celebration, because people are living well and living longer and achieving all the goals that they want to achieve. I have friends who are HIV positive and are pilots. I have friends who are HIV positive and are medical doctors. You understand me? I have friends who are who are HIV positive and they are raising families. So I think that the stigma is becoming quite cosmetic, and I think we need to remove that element of stigma, from the work we do within the HIV sector.
All right, okay. I'm gonna delve a little bit deeper what you just said there. Remove that from the in the area of work that we work in, about how we talk about stigma. I was going to ask you something. So do you think, I feel that I'm of a similar age to you. So I'm 54. You said you were 60, I think. You look fabulous.
Thank you so much.
So we were brought up in the same generation. I think they call us Generation X. I think we are.
I'm quite honest, I've not quite worked that out, but
Yeah, we're Generation X, and then you have the millennials underneath us, and then you have Gen Z underneath us. And my children are millennials, and they are also Gen Z. And I feel that there is a shift in the younger generation when it comes to LGBTQ access, community education, and also HIV. When I told my children I was living with HIV, the response was, well, it's not that deep, Mum. So I think there is something about the younger generation. I think the older generation, when it comes to HIV, in the 1980s, the stigma that they experienced. But I feel that it's kind of more than, it's not even about HIV. It's about how we are as humans towards each other. Be it HIV, be it diabetes, be it a disability, a neurodivergent tendency. We are also, be it that you're queer, we are all so different. And the thing about it is that with all our differences, you have structures that try to keep us all the same. The tick box, straight, cis, woman, man, etc. And I think that they're so important that there are spaces for people who feel different, and they want to move away from a structure that they have kind of grown up in. And I see you as someone that has done that as an older person who has been able to live your truth. You're smiling.
I am smiling because I want to tell you to speak for yourself when you're talking about me being an older person.
Ah,
I'll tell you one thing I know seriously. I mean, yes, I am going 60 next year. And I think that this is what the new 30 looks like. So I think that for me, I think that it is important that we recognize the shift in culture when it comes to HIV. And you talk about the different generations. To be quite honest, I literally do not recognize a lot of those Gen Z, millennial, things like that. But nonetheless, I think it's important that we look at HIV from the lens of those decades. So if you look at it, what does HIV look like in the 1980s? What does it look like in the 1990s? What does it look like in the noughties? And what does it look like now? Do you understand me? There is a lot of access to information, but there is still a lot of gaps as well. Okay. Now, of course, I mean, when HIV was happening in the 1980s, people were being infected, but there was no information about prevention. Okay. When it came to the 1990s, we started talking about prevention, and prevention came with a price because we knew that the religious communities were literally interfering in how to prevent HIV. They introduced what used to be known as the ABC model. They said people need to abstain from sexual activity. They need to be faithful or use condom. But of course, we know that those interventions did not work. That is why I am part of an organization called the International Network of Religious Leaders Living with HIV, INRELA for short. You understand me? Where we've introduced what we call SAVE, SAVE. You understand me? And SAVE stands for it just skipped my mind. I'll come back to that in 2 seconds. I was talking about it just a few days ago. SAVE is let me start with the AVE. I'll come back. I'll have to do this in full later. Adherence to treatment, voluntary counseling, and empowerment. Do you understand me? And I think that the reality for this intervention is that it counters the ABC model. You understand me? And I've completely forgotten what the S stands for. So I'll come back to that if it comes to me. But let me also talk about the fact that there has been some shift in how people understand HIV today. There's a lot more information around prevention. And that's why we have things like, PrEP and PEP, and even PrEP has really, excel in his understanding and access to it as well. So, I mean, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. This is a medication that people can take to prevent themselves from getting HIV. A lot of us living with HIV did not have access to any medication to prevent ourselves from getting HIV. PEP is post-exposure prophylaxis. So if you had a sexual contact or any kind of contact, that is likely to cause an HIV infection, you can, within 72 hours, you can go to accident and emergency and request for PEP medication that will stop it. And, we've also seen development now. We've now got things like, doxy-PEP, to prevent other STIs from happening. Now, of course, there are communities around the world and I just remember, goodness me, I'm going to stop myself. SAVE. S stands for safer practice. That's it. So let me just explain that just in a moment so that you can capture that. SAVE stands for safer practice, adherence to treatment, voluntary counseling, and empowerment. You see, safer practice means that, you could be in a relationship with someone that their sexual history and their sexual habits. You understand me? Or you are in a monogamous relationship and, you have safer sex practice with them, period. You understand me?
Yeah.
And then safer practice also includes the use of condoms, and PrEP and PEP and all of these things that I just spoke about. Adherence to treatment for those who are HIV positive, as long as you adhere to your treatment faithfully. But we also need the right environment for people to adhere. Poverty is a big issue for many people living with HIV. A very stigmatized environment. In Nigeria, my home country, a lot of people living with HIV are being fired from their jobs when they found out that they're HIV positive. And I know that there are laws in Nigeria and many places to actually stop the discrimination of people living with HIV, but it doesn't happen. Voluntary counseling is very important. People living with HIV needs peer support. These are communities that help you to live day to day and live longer and further in your life. And of course, finally, empowerment. Waking up every day and knowing that you have to take your medication every single day is challenging in itself, but we need that empowerment to be able to do so. We need stories and narratives like my own story of somebody who's living well with HIV 21 years. There are people that are living well with HIV for over 40 years.
Yeah.
So we cannot minimize those stories as well. And there are people who are pioneers, like the Canon Reverend Gideon Bayemugisha, who came out with his HIV status as a practicing Anglican minister in 1992. That is an incredible story that we need to be talking about and sharing. And I hope that you'll be able to get him on your podcast if you haven't already done so. But I think the reality is that, there is more access to information. There's more availability of information today. But I think that we're still missing something, we need to have the conversation about HIV, as if it's a headache. Seriously, we don't have to distance ourselves from the subject. It doesn't have to be a special case or a special dispensation. I think that we need to come to a place where we actively normalize a conversation around HIV. I should be able to say to someone, "Good morning, my name is Jide, and I'm a person living with HIV," without them turning away or trying to defend or rush away from me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, if there's one thing that you'd want to kind of, if there's one message that you'd like to give to people listening to this podcast, Jide, what would that be?
To be quite honest, I mean, there are many messages, and I think that, if there is one, because we're talking about, my story, how it all happened and how it's going. I think that for anyone that is Black, African, queer, a person of faith, living with HIV or indeed any other long-term health condition, be proud of yourself. Be very, very proud of yourself. Because, illnesses just don't happen to you. And as a Christian myself, I strongly believe that God does not give us, or God has not given me a burden that I cannot bear. I'm using the fact that as a Black man, as a Black priest in the Church of God, who is both gay and HIV positive, I am using everything about me to glorify the name of God. People might turn around and say, "Oh my God, this is demonic, this is an abomination." I will leave that to them. But I think that it's only God that can judge me. Do you understand me? So I believe that, God has me covered. God has my back. I did not ask for HIV. You understand me? People might say, "Oh, but because you're homosexual." But there are people that are born with HIV. Did they ask for it? There are people who got HIV through blood transfusion. Did they ask for it? There are people who got HIV because they shared a syringe, injecting drugs or injecting any other substances. Do they deserve it? So we need to be quite mindful. There are older people now, people over the age of 50 that are also being infected by HIV. So we have to be mindful about how we translate those messages. But I think that I'm using every of my own circumstances and own stories, to let people know that it's okay, for you to be yourself, for you to be able to wake up every day and thank God, thank the universe, thank your ancestors for bringing you, to this new day.
Oh, and I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for being so visible. Thank you for being on social media, looking glamorous, looking different, and looking uniquely queer. Thank you for speaking your truth. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Jide.
You're welcome.
Okay, she's down the line.
Thanks for watching Auntie Lou's Hour. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe.